We're about to dive into one of the most unbelievable stories in modern history. It's a crazy story about economics, empire, and addiction on a scale that's hard to wrap your head around. And it all starts with something you probably have in your kitchen right now: tea.
So, this is the big question, right? How on earth does a whole country's love for tea spiral into a massive drug crisis and not one, but two wars? It sounds totally made up, but the answer is as real as it is disturbing.
Okay, so it all kicks off with this huge, one-sided trade problem between the British Empire and China back in the 1800s. It was basically a one-way street, and all the traffic was going in the wrong direction for Britain.
Just look at how lopsided this whole thing was. The British were absolutely obsessed with Chinese goods. We're talking tea, silk, gorgeous porcelain. But China, their economy was pretty much self-sufficient. They had zero interest in anything the British were selling. The only thing they would accept for their goods was silver. And this meant Britain was just bleeding silver, creating a massive drain of wealth straight to China.
So you can see Britain's got a huge problem on its hands. All its money is ending up in China. They desperately needed a way to get that cash flowing back. And their solution? Well, it was ruthless, it was cynical, and man was it effective. They decided to become drug dealers.
The plan they came up with was shockingly simple. If China wasn't going to buy British products, fine. Britain would just sell them a product they couldn't say no to: opium. The whole idea was to get millions of people hooked, reverse that flow of silver, and bring it all flooding back into British pockets. And they didn't just dip their toes in the water, they went all in. Over in British-controlled India, they set aside a staggering 100,000 acres of prime farmland just to grow opium poppies. This wasn't some back-alley deal. This was an industrial-scale, state-sponsored drug empire. And the result? Get this. 3 million kilograms of opium were smuggled into China every single year. This absolute flood of narcotics kicked off a horrifying addiction crisis that started to rip Chinese society apart. And all the while, British bank accounts were getting fuller and fuller. So eventually, the Chinese government had no choice but to step in. They tried to crack down hard, seizing and destroying huge shipments of British opium. Now, you'd think that would be a wake-up call for Britain, right? But their response wasn't to stop. It was to declare war, to protect their right to sell drugs.
And here's how it all went down. In the First Opium War, Britain's modern navy just completely steamrolled China's forces. The result was the Treaty of Nanking, where China was forced to give up the island of Hong Kong. Then, just over a decade later, China tried to push back again. This sparked the Second Opium War, where Britain, and this time France, beat them once more. And the final humiliation? The thing they were fighting against, the opium trade itself, was made completely legal.
So, with the wars lost and the drug trade now totally legal and out in the open, what happened to China? The consequences were absolutely catastrophic. This event is what kicks off a period that China now calls its century of humiliation.
I mean, think about it. Before, Britain was already smuggling millions of kilos into the country. But now that it was legal, there were no limits, no restrictions. The floodgates were thrown wide open, and an already terrible problem was about to get so much worse.
The numbers here are just gut-wrenching. Once the trade was legalized, the amount of opium pouring into China doubled to 6 million kilograms a year. This unleashed an addiction crisis on a scale that is almost impossible to imagine, which really forces you to ask, who is ultimately in charge of this whole operation?
I mean, when you really stop and think about this entire system, a state-sponsored operation to grow a narcotic, smuggle it into another country, and then wage two wars to make sure you can keep selling it, you have to look right to the very top of the British Empire.
Yeah, when you consider the sheer scale of it all, the state power that enforced it, from the poppy fields in India to the warships off the coast of China, it leads you to one really shocking conclusion. This entire state-sponsored drug trade makes Queen Victoria arguably the biggest drug dealer in all of history. A pretty sobering thought to end on.